Jin-Ho Park stood at attention before the massive doors of the Galactic Council's meeting chamber. His heart raced beneath his crisp blue uniform, though his face remained carefully neutral. The young captain had spent weeks preparing for this diplomatic meeting, his first real chance to represent humanity on the galactic stage. The weight of responsibility pressed down on his shoulders like a physical force. The doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a vast circular chamber. Crystalline beings known as the Myrians filled one section, their translucent bodies refracting light in rainbow patterns across the walls. Other alien species occupied their designated areas, some humanoid, others decidedly not. Jin-Ho took a deep breath and walked forward with measured steps. Captain Jin-Ho Park, representing Earth's diplomatic corps, announced the automated system. The chamber's perfect acoustics carried his footsteps as he approached the central podium. He could feel dozens of alien eyes studying his every move. "We welcome Earth's representative," spoke the lead Myrian delegate, their voice chiming like wind through crystal. "Please proceed with your proposal regarding trade routes through the Orion Arm." Jin-Ho began his carefully prepared speech, but something felt off. The air held an odd tension, different from the usual diplomatic atmosphere. His military training, drilled into him through years at the academy, screamed that something was wrong. He was halfway through discussing cargo inspection protocols when he caught a slight movement in his peripheral vision. Without conscious thought, Jin-Ho dropped and rolled. A plasma bolt sizzled through the space where his head had been moments before. Chaos erupted in the chamber. Delegates scattered, some diving for cover while others froze in shock. Security alarms blared as more plasma bolts cut through the air. Jin-Ho found himself behind a fallen marble column, his heart pounding but his mind surprisingly clear. And then he started laughing. It wasn't a nervous giggle or a hysterical outburst. It was genuine amusement at the absurdity of the situation. Here he was, giving his first major diplomatic speech, and someone was trying to kill him. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. The Myrian delegates, who had taken cover nearby, stared at him with their crystalline faces showing patterns of confusion. Their bodies literally clouded with bewilderment at the sound of his laughter. "Well," Jin-Ho chuckled, casually brushing some marble dust from his sleeve as another plasma bolt struck nearby. "I guess this meeting is getting a bit too heated for my taste." The assassin, a towering insectoid creature with gleaming chitin armor, paused in its attack. Its compound eyes focused on Jin-Ho, antennae twitching in what appeared to be confusion. This reaction clearly wasn't part of its mission parameters. That moment of hesitation was all Security Chief Hei-Yun Lee needed. She had been waiting for precisely such an opening, and she took it with professional precision. Moving like a blur of motion, she vaulted over a nearby railing and tackled the insectoid assassin. Despite the creature's superior size and strength, Hei-Yun's momentum and training gave her the advantage. The assassin's weapon clattered to the floor as Hei-Yun smoothly applied restraints designed to work on multiple species' anatomies. The insectoid struggled, but the security chief had clearly done this before. "Looks like someone didn't read the memo about peaceful negotiations," Hei-Yun quipped as she secured the last restraint, her own lips twitching with amusement. As additional security forces flooded into the chamber, Jin-Ho stood up and straightened his uniform. The Myrian delegates were still staring at him, their crystalline bodies now showing patterns that indicated deep thought and analysis. "Captain Park," the lead Myrian delegate chimed, their voice carrying undertones of curiosity. "Your response to a life-threatening situation is unusual. Most species display fear or anger when faced with death. You displayed amusement." Jin-Ho smiled warmly at the delegate. "Sometimes, honored delegate, laughter is the most logical response to an illogical situation. Besides," he added with a slight shrug, "being afraid wouldn't have made those plasma bolts any less deadly, would it?" The Myrian's body shimmered with new patterns, indicating interest and perhaps a hint of respect. "Fascinating. Perhaps we humans and Mirians have much more to discuss than just trade routes. As the chamber slowly returned to order and medical teams checked for injuries, Jin Ho couldn't help but notice how the other alien delegates were looking at him differently now. His response to the assassination attempt had clearly made an impression, though whether good or bad remained to be seen. Later that day, as Jin Ho filed his report on the incident, he reflected that this probably wasn't what his superiors had in mind when they told him to make a memorable first impression. Still, he couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the best diplomacy happened in the most unexpected moments, even when those moments involved dodging plasma bolts and laughing in the face of death. The incident would later be marked in diplomatic records as the first documented case of human humor being used as an unintentional but effective form of alien communication. It wouldn't be the last. The soft whir of medical scanners filled the small examination room as Dr. Kita-Yun sat patiently on the observation table. This was his 5th session with Dr. Var, the Galactic Council's most renowned xenopsychologist, and Kita could tell the silver-skinned alien was getting frustrated. "Please explain again," Dr. Var said, his metallic fingers tapping against his datapad. "What you found amusing about nearly losing your arm in the laboratory accident last week." Kita grinned, remembering the incident. "Well, when the quantum stabilizer exploded, I told my assistant it looked like I'd need a hand with the cleanup. Get it? Because my arm was hanging by a thread." Dr. Var's silver face rippled with what Kita had learned to recognize as distress. The alien species, the Varaxians, expressed emotions through waves of color and texture across their metallic skin. Right now, Dr. Var looked like a disturbed pond in moonlight. "Your response continues to defy conventional psychological models," Dr. Var said, making more notes. "Most species react to severe injury with fear, anger, or at minimum, appropriate concern. You made a, what do you call it? A pun." Keita nodded enthusiastically. "Humor helps us process trauma. Besides, the medical nanites fixed everything up good as new. Would you like to hear what I said when they were reattaching my arm? I suspect I will regret asking, but yes, please continue." "I told the medical team not to worry about rushing. I was already armed with patience." Kita laughed at his own joke while Dr. Var's skin rippled with increasing disturbance. "You humans," Dr. Var noted, his voice carrying a hint of what might have been exasperation, "find humor in the most inappropriate moments. It's disturbing." Keita shrugged, still smiling. "Life's too short to take death too seriously. Speaking of which, did you hear about the human who walked into a bar?" He said, "Ouch." Dr. Var's skin went completely still, a reaction Kita hadn't seen before. The alien stared at him for a long moment before speaking. "That joke, it involves physical pain as well. You find injury inherently amusing." "Not the injury itself," Kita explained, trying to help the alien understand. "It's the wordplay. A bar can be a place to drink or a metal pole. The unexpected meaning creates humor. But yes, we often joke about things that scare us. It helps make them less frightening." Dr. Var started pacing the room, his skin now showing complex patterns Kita couldn't interpret. "In our previous sessions, you made jokes about the vacuum of space, toxic atmospheres, and now dismemberment. All potentially lethal situations. Don't forget the one about the airlock malfunction," Kita added helpfully. "I said it really sucked, remember?" The alien doctor stopped pacing and turned to face Kita. "Your species uses humor as both a defensive and offensive mechanism, a psychological shield against fear, and a weapon to unsettle others who don't understand your reactions." "That's pretty deep, Doc. I just thought I was being funny." Dr. Var's skin rippled with academic excitement. "This explains so much about human diplomatic and military successes. Your ability to laugh in the face of death isn't just a coping mechanism. It's a demonstration of psychological resilience that other species find deeply unnerving." Keita thought about this for a moment. Is that why the Marian delegation got so freaked out when Captain Park started joking during the assassination attempt? Precisely. Dr. Var began making rapid notes. Most species interpret laughter as a sign of pleasure or happiness. When humans laugh in response to danger or death, it creates cognitive dissonance in observers. They cannot understand why you would express joy at your own potential demise. Huh. Kita mused. So you're saying our bad jokes are actually a superpower? In a manner of speaking, yes. Though I wouldn't classify your jokes as bad. I simply lack the psychological framework to appreciate them properly. Dr. Var paused, then added, though the armed with patience one was objectively terrible. Kita burst out laughing. Doc, I think you just made your first joke. Dr. Var's skin showed patterns of alarm. I did no such thing. I was merely stating a fact about the quality of your humor. Sure, Kita said, still chuckling. But you might want to be careful. Human humor can be contagious. Before you know it, you'll be telling knock-knock jokes. I believe we are done for today, Dr. Var said quickly, backing toward the door. Please return tomorrow for further observation. And please, he added with what sounded almost like desperation, no more puns. As the alien doctor hurried out, Kita called after him. Hey, why don't Varaxians tell dad jokes? Because they're all metallicing. He could hear Dr. Var's distressed muttering all the way down the hallway. Later that day, Dr. Var would write in his official report that he had discovered something both fascinating and terrifying about humans, their ability to use humor as both shield and sword. What he didn't include in the report was that, for a brief moment, he had almost understood why they laughed. Red alert lights pulsed across the bridge of the HSS Dauntless as Commander Sun McKim watched the enemy fleet materialize from hyperspace. The massive Raxan warships, their dark hulls bristling with weapon arrays, moved to surround her battle group with practiced precision. Status report, Sun Mai ordered, her voice steady despite the growing tension. Around her, the bridge crew worked with focused efficiency, though she noticed more than a few smiles playing at their lips. 8 Raxan dreadnoughts, Commander. Lieutenant Du Hyun Baek reported from the tactical station. They're deploying fighter screens. We're completely surrounded. He sounded almost cheerful about it. The Allied Marian cruiser floating alongside the Dauntless sent an urgent communication. Human Commander, we suggest immediate surrender. The odds of survival are approximately 0.3%. Sun Mi smiled, settling more comfortably in her command chair. Thank you for the suggestion, Marian friends, but we humans have a saying. Never tell us the odds. It just makes victory more satisfying. All weapons charged and ready, Du Hyun announced, grinning broadly. Target locked on their lit ship. Should we knock on their hull? Who's there? Sun Mai replied automatically, even as she keyed in evasive maneuver commands. The bridge crew chuckled, their laughter a stark contrast to the battle alerts blaring through the ship. Human Commander, the Marian captain's voice crackled with confusion. Your crew appears to be celebrating. Are your neural processors malfunctioning? Not at all, Sun Mai replied, watching the enemy ships close in. We're just enjoying ourselves. After all, how often do you get to dance with 8 dreadnoughts? The first salvos from the Raxan fleet lit up space around them. The Dauntless shuddered as its shields absorbed multiple hits. Sun Mi's fingers flew across her tactical display, orchestrating her small fleet's response. Direct hit on their lead ship. Du Hyun whooped. Looks like they didn't find our joke very knockable. The bridge crew's laughter mixed with the sound of explosions as the battle intensified. Sun Mi coordinated with her squadron, their ships moving in perfect synchronization despite being heavily outnumbered. The human crews maintained their cheerful banter throughout the engagement, sharing jokes and puns, even as they fought for their lives. Enemy communication intercepted, reported Communications Officer Min Ji Cho, trying to suppress her giggles. They're demanding to know why we're laughing. Should I tell them we're just having a blast? Send them our usual response package, Sun Mai ordered, executing a particularly daring maneuver that brought the Dauntless within point-blank range of Araxan dreadnought. The usual response package was a collection of human battle recordings, specifically chosen to showcase crews laughing and joking during intense combat. It had proven remarkably effective at unsettling enemy forces who couldn't understand why humans found battle so amusing. "Commander," the Mirian captain called again, their crystalline voice vibrating with concern. "Your tactical approach is most irregular. The enemy appears confused by your crew's behavior." "Good," Sun Mai replied, watching as the Raxan fleet's formation began to show signs of uncertainty. "Confusion leads to hesitation. Hesitation leads to mistakes. And mistakes." She paused as Du Hyun's perfectly timed shot caused a spectacular explosion in the enemy line. "Well, those are always funny." The battle raged for hours, but the tide slowly turned. The human ships' unconventional tactics, combined with their crew's unnerving good humor, gradually wore down the Raxan forces. Enemy ships began to retreat, their carefully planned attack dissolving into chaos. "They're breaking formation," Du Hyun announced proudly. "Should we give them a goodbye wave?" "Better," Sun Mai grinned. "Give them a parting joke. Fire the smiley face pattern we practiced." The Dauntless's final barrage traced a massive glowing smiley face against the hull of the retreating Raxan flagship. The sight of their feared warship marked with a human symbol of happiness would become legendary in future retellings of the battle. As the enemy fleet retreated into hyperspace, the Mirian captain requested permission to board the Dauntless. "We must understand," they insisted, "how you maintain such high morale during certain death scenarios." Sun Mai welcomed them aboard, still chuckling about the smiley face. "It's simple," she explained to the bewildered alien. "When you learn to laugh at death, death loses its power to frighten you. And when you're not afraid, you fight better." The Raxan after-action reports would note with confusion how human communication channels had been filled with laughter during what their analysts called the bloodiest battle of the war. They never fully understood that the laughter itself had been a weapon, one more effective than any plasma cannon. As the Dauntless's crew began repair operations, Sun Mai could hear them sharing jokes about the battle, turning near-death experiences into amusing anecdotes. She smiled, knowing that somewhere in the galaxy, the Raxans were still trying to understand why humans laughed in the face of death. They probably never would. The stark white walls of Outpost 7's detention center seemed to pulse with each electrical discharge. Sergeant Jae-won Choi hung from his restraints, his military uniform in tatters, but his eyes sparkled with amusement. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, yet somehow he managed to maintain a lopsided grin. General Emmix, the towering insectoid commander of the facility, clicked his mandibles in frustration. For 3 days, he had employed every interrogation technique in his considerable arsenal. The human should have broken by now. Instead, Jae-won seemed to be treating the whole experience like some sort of entertainment review. "I'd give that one a 6 out of 10, Jae-won commented, spitting blood onto the pristine floor. "The electrical charge was creative, but your timing needs work. You should really let the pain build up more before hitting the next surge." "Amateur mistake, really." The guards exchanged uncomfortable glances. They had never seen a prisoner like this before. Most species either broke down crying, retreated into catatonic silence, or died trying to resist. None of them had ever offered constructive criticism on their torture techniques. "You find this amusing, human?" General Emmix's voice rasped through his translator. "Perhaps we should increase the voltage." Jae-won actually perked up at this suggestion. "Oh, going for the classic power-up move. That's so retro. You know what would really sell it? Some dramatic lighting. Maybe a fog machine. Really set the mood, you know." The guard operating the control panel hesitated, his four-fingered hand hovering over the controls. He looked to General Emmix for guidance, clearly unsettled by the prisoner's response. "Your psychological warfare is ineffective," Emmix declared, though his antennae twitched with uncertainty. "We will break you." Break me. Jae-won laughed, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his injuries. My friend, I once had to sit through my sister's entire wedding video collection. This is practically a vacation in comparison. General Amix stepped closer, studying the human's face. In all his years of military service, he had never encountered a species that could transform pain into humor. It was unsettling. Tell us the location of the human fleet, Memhex demanded, signaling for another round of electrical torture. As the current coursed through him, Jae-won managed to gasp out, "You know what's really electrifying? Your conversation skills." He actually giggled between spasms of pain. One of the guards abruptly left the room, their exoskeleton clicking rapidly in what might have been distress. General MX felt something unfamiliar stirring in his thorax. Fear, not of the human's physical strength, but of his unshakable spirit that turned pain into comedy. "Perhaps we should try a different approach," MX suggested, gesturing for the electricity to be stopped. "Already? But I was just getting warmed up." Jae-won grinned through bloodied teeth. "Get it? Warmed up? Because of the electricity? Come on, that's at least worth a chuckle." The remaining guards' mandibles clicked in what might have been nervous laughter, then quickly stopped when General MX glared at them. "You cannot resist forever," Nanak stated, trying to regain control of the situation. "Every being has a breaking point." "True," Jae-won agreed cheerfully. "Mine's probably somewhere between watching paint dry and listening to political debates. This," he rattled his chains, "this is just giving me material for my stand-up routine. So I was being tortured the other day. It's going to kill at the military comedy club." General MX felt his professional composure cracking. The human's constant jokes were having an effect he hadn't anticipated. They were demoralizing his own staff. How could they maintain the psychological advantage when the prisoner treated everything like a comedy show? "You show your weakness through these attempts at humor." Max tried one last time, his voice lacking conviction. "Weakness?" Jae-won raised an eyebrow. "My friend, laughing in the face of pain isn't weakness. It's a superpower. Want to know why?" He leaned forward as much as his restraints would allow, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Because nothing terrifies an enemy more than someone who can laugh at their worst." The truth of those words hit General MX like a physical blow. He had encountered resistance before, had broken the strongest wills. But this was different. The human's laughter echoed through the detention center, not the broken sound of a mind snapped by torture, but the genuine mirth of someone who had found joy in the darkest place possible. "We will continue this tomorrow," Menks announced abruptly, turning to leave. Ending the party so soon?" Jae-won called after him. "I was going to suggest some team-building exercises. Nothing brings torturers and prisoners together like trust falls." As General MX hurried from the room, he could still hear Jae-won's laughter following him down the corridor. For the first time in his military career, he would have to report that a prisoner had not only resisted interrogation, but had somehow turned it into entertainment at their expense. Somewhere in the facility's database, a notation would be made. Human prisoners demonstrate unprecedented psychological resilience through the use of humor. Caution advised in interrogation procedures. Effect on interrogator morale: severe. And in his cell, Jae-won Choi continued to smile, already working on new material for tomorrow's session. After all, he thought, what was a little torture without a good punchline? The Grand Chamber of the United Earth Defense Council hummed with tension as Admiral Yoo-jin Kang strode to the central podium. Her decorated uniform gleamed under the bright lights, medals clinking softly with each step. The assembled military leaders and alien observers watched her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored allies," Yoo-jin began, her voice clear and confident. "Our conventional warfare strategies against the Raxan Empire have reached a stalemate. But I believe I've found our greatest weapon, one that's been right in front of us all along." She gestured, and the massive holographic display behind her came to life, showing footage from various battles. Each clip featured human soldiers in combat situations, but something was different about their behavior. "Notice how our troops naturally employ humor during combat," Yu-Jin pointed out. "Even in the most desperate situations, they joke, laugh, and maintain high morale." Our alien allies initially found this disturbing. But more importantly, so did our enemies. The Mirian representative's crystalline form shimmered with confusion. "Admiral, are you suggesting we use jokes as weapons?" "Precisely." Yu-Jin smiled. "I propose we deploy the Laughing Dragons, a special forces unit specifically trained to weaponize our unique psychological advantage." The footage changed to show training exercises. The elite soldiers charged into simulated combat, shouting punchlines instead of battle cries. Their laughter echoed across battlefields as they executed perfect combat maneuvers. "The data is remarkable," Yu-Jin continued. "Enemy forces show a 40% decrease in combat effectiveness when faced with soldiers who treat battle like entertainment. They simply cannot process why we laugh in the face of death." A gruff general leaned forward. "You want us to turn our best soldiers into comedians?" "No, sir. I want us to acknowledge that our humor is already a weapon. We just haven't been using it strategically." Yu-Jin brought up more battle footage. "Look at Sergeant Choi's recent escape from Outpost 7. He didn't overpower his captors. He psychologically broke them by turning torture into a comedy routine." A junior commander stepped forward, his antennae twitching with distress. "Supreme Commander, we've lost contact with the 7th Battalion. Her last transmission." He paused, mandibles clicking rapidly. "Their last transmission reported that the humans were singing something called 'Always Look on the Bright Side of Life' while overrunning their position." The humans, reported another shaking commander, his exoskeleton practically vibrating with fear. "They laugh as they die. They joke as they kill. What are they?" Vexith had no answer. In all his centuries of military service, he had never encountered anything like Field Marshal Min Seo-ryu's forces. The humans didn't fight like any species they had ever faced. "Show me the prisoner interrogation footage," Vexith demanded. The hologram shifted to show a captured human soldier. Despite severe injuries, she was grinning at her captors. "Hey, why did the Raxan cross the galaxy?" "Because someone told him humans were scary." She laughed at her own joke, even as the interrogator applied more pressure. "These are the psychological warfare tactics of Field Marshal Ryu," explained the military analyst. "Her troops are trained to use humor as a weapon. Our soldiers cannot maintain combat effectiveness when faced with an enemy that treats death like entertainment." Reports flooded in from across the front lines. Human strike teams, dubbed Laughing Dragons, were breaking the morale of entire Raxan divisions, not through superior firepower, but through psychological warfare that defied all military doctrine. Field Marshal Ryu's latest transmission, "Supreme Commander," announced the communications officer reluctantly. Min Seo's holographic image appeared in the center of the chamber. She was smiling, which made every Raxan present instinctively back away. "Greetings, Supreme Commander Vexith," she said cheerfully. "I hope you're enjoying our little comedy tour across your defense sector. My troops wanted me to ask, why don't Raxans tell good jokes? Because they're too busy bugging out." The pun was terrible, but that only made it more disturbing. Several junior officers fled the chamber, their psychological conditioning shattered by the humans' casual humor in the face of war. "You cannot win this way," Vexith declared, trying to maintain his composure. "War is not a game, human." "Of course it's not," Min Seo agreed, still smiling. "Games are supposed to be fun. We're just doing our jobs and making the best of it. Speaking of which, your northern flank could really use some work on their defensive formations. They're practically asking for a punchline." The transmission ended, leaving the Raxan High Command in unsettled silence. Min Seo's reputation had spread across the galaxy. The commander whose laughter terrified more than any weapon. Supreme Commander, ventured one of the few remaining officers, perhaps we should consider tactical withdrawal. Our troops, they cannot face this. The humans don't break under pressure. They laugh at it. How do we fight an enemy that finds joy in battle? Vexith stared at the battle maps, watching as more positions fell to Minsio's forces. Each defeat was accompanied by human laughter, jokes, and songs. It defied everything they knew about warfare. "Send the order," he finally said, his voice heavy with defeat. "Full retreat from this sector." And, he added, mandibles clicking softly, "mark all human-controlled spaces with a new warning classification." "What classification?" "Supreme Commander." "The laughing zones," Vexith replied, "where death comes with a smile." As the Rexan forces began their retreat, Minsio's voice echoed through their communications one last time. Why did the Rexan army run away? Because they couldn't take a joke. The sound of human laughter followed the retreating ships, a sound that would haunt their dreams for years to come. Field Marshal Minsio Ryu had proven that sometimes the most powerful weapon wasn't a gun or a bomb. It was the ability to laugh in the face of death itself. The grand chambers of the Galactic Council gleamed under the soft light of 1,000 stars visible through the transparent dome above. Professor Tahi Song stood at the podium, her silver-streaked hair and weathered face reflecting the 5 difficult years since the war's end. Around her, representatives from 100 different species waited in respectful silence. "Distinguished members of the Council," she began, her voice carrying easily through the vast space. "Today marks 5 years since the end of the Rexan War. You've asked me here to explain why humanity proved so uniquely effective in combat. The answer is both simpler and more complex than you might expect." She gestured to the holographic display behind her, showing various footage from the war. Captain Jin Ho Park joking during an assassination attempt. Sergeant Jae-won Choi turning torture into comedy. The laughing dragons charging into battle with smiles on their faces. "Humanity's greatest weapon was never our technology or our numbers," she explained, watching the aliens' reactions. "It was our ability to face the darkness with a smile." Amirian representative's crystalline form shimmered with confusion. But how can one smile at death? It defies logical response patterns. Tahi smiled gently. "That's precisely what made it so effective. Every species fears death, including humans. But somewhere in our long history, we learned to laugh at our fears. Not because we don't feel them, but because laughter gives us power over them." The display showed footage of human emergency workers joking while rescuing people from disaster zones, soldiers sharing laughs in the trenches, and medical teams using humor to comfort the wounded. "We laugh in the face of death not because we don't fear it," she continued, her voice softening, "but because we choose to embrace life even in its shadow. That's what makes us human. Our jokes aren't signs of disrespect for death. They're celebrations of life." The Varaxian representative's metallic skin rippled with understanding. "This explains why psychological warfare against humans proved ineffective. You had already transformed your greatest fear into a source of strength." "Exactly," Tahi nodded. "Every species develops defense mechanisms. Yours developed impenetrable exoskeletons. The Myrians evolved crystalline forms that can regenerate. We humans, we learned to laugh." She brought up new footage, recent scenes of humans teaching alien species to use humor as a coping mechanism. Hospitals where human doctors used jokes to help patients recover. Military training exercises where human instructors taught alien soldiers how to maintain morale through laughter. "In the years since the war," Tahi said, "we've seen something remarkable. Other species are learning from us, not just to fear our laughter, but to understand it, to use it themselves." Ambassador Jin Ho Park, now older but still carrying that same irrepressible smile, stood up from his seat in the diplomatic section. "In a universe full of terrors," he added, "sometimes you just have to laugh." A ripple of something very much like chuckles moved through the alien representatives. They didn't quite understand the humor yet, but they were learning. Humanity's gift to the galaxy isn't just our technology or our military strategies, Tahi concluded. It's the understanding that joy can exist alongside fear, that laughter can be found even in the darkest moments. We've shown that the best defense against terror isn't more terror, it's the ability to smile in its face. As she finished speaking, something unprecedented happened in the Galactic Council chambers. It began with a single Mirian delegate, their crystalline form vibrating in an attempt to mimic human laughter. Then a Varaxian joined in, their metallic skin shimmering with amusement. Soon, the chamber filled with the sounds of 100 different species trying to laugh. They didn't quite get it right. Some sounds were more like whistles, others like clicks or hums, but the intent was there, and that was what mattered. The galaxy was learning that laughter wasn't just a human weapon, it was a gift they could share. Tahi watched with tears of joy in her eyes as the various species attempted to share in this most human of expressions. Perhaps this, she thought, was humanity's true victory, not conquering their enemies, but teaching the galaxy how to laugh. And somewhere, she was sure, death itself was learning to appreciate the joke.